Well, good afternoon. Welcome to Preservation Connecticut's Spring 2022 series talking about preservation, our noontime chats about everything preservation. I'm Jane Montanaro, Executive Director of Preservation Connecticut, and I'm delighted to be your host as we have the opportunity to chat with Kathleen Maher, Executive Director of the Barnum Museum in Bridgeport. Kathy will share insights on P.T. Barnum and his lasting legacy, and she'll also talk about the museum and how they are working on new and innovative methods of experience development, integrating history, arts, storytelling, gaming, science, and technology to create a dynamic 21st century museum for the future. But before I hand the controls over to Kathy, let me give you a brief intro into Preservation Connecticut. Preservation Connecticut is the statewide private nonprofit historic preservation organization founded in 1975 by a special act of the Connecticut General Assembly as the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation to preserve, protect, and promote the buildings, sites, and landscapes that contribute to the heritage and vitality of Connecticut's communities. We are statutory partners with the Connecticut State Historic Preservation Office, and I am proud to say that for over 4 decades, we have successfully championed the protection of remarkable community assets all over the state by leveraging funding, advocating, forming partnerships, and promoting stewardship. Our office is on Whitney Avenue in Hamden, Connecticut, and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Shown here, it's the Eli Whitney Boarding House, built in 1827 to house workers for Eli Whitney's factory, and it served as Preservation Connecticut's headquarters since 1989. We have a staff of 9 preservation professionals and a board of 21 preservationists from around the state. Staff listed here are always available to assist with inquiries. Chris Wiegren is our Deputy Director. Contact Chris for information on historic preservation easements, our bi-monthly magazine, Connecticut Preservation News, our Olmsted in Connecticut Landscape Survey Project, or to arrange book talks for his book, Connecticut Architecture, Stories of 100 Places. Renee Trebert, Making Places and Preservation Services Manager. Please contact Renee for information on redevelopment of historic industrial sites and tax credit applications. Jordan Sorensen is our Development and Special Projects Manager. Jordan manages our communications and outreach to members through social media and email, receives and monitors demolition notices from municipalities, and prepares historic tax credit applications and nominations to state and National Register of Historic Places. Kristen Hopewood, Development Assistant, manages all of the inquiries that come through our website, provides member services, arranges special events, and is the editor of our Historic Properties Exchange, a free listing of threatened historic properties. And finally, our team of circuit riders, Brad Scheid, Mike Farino, Stacy Vero, and Stefan Danchuk. They provide immediate boots on the ground service to homeowners, developers, municipal leaders, nonprofit organizations, and museums, historic district commissions, and more, with an array of preservation technical assistance, including community organizing, prioritizing maintenance and repairs, historic designations, funding, and archaeology. These chats have served as a meaningful way for us to continue our mission during the ongoing pandemic. We've been able to connect with the public and hear what's on your mind. Please feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions or ask questions directly at the end of the presentation. And of course, you can contact us afterwards for a call or a site visit. And I'd like to give a shout out to our very generous sponsor, Hoops, Morgenthaler, Rausch, and Scaramoza, attorneys at law. They sponsored this event, and they also sponsored our Connecticut Preservation Awards, which we held a few weeks ago. And before I give the controls to Kathy, I just give you a promotion for next week's chat. June 1st at noon, we will have Tom Shook, New London historian and researcher for the new Black Heritage Trail. The trail celebrates 3 centuries of Black strength, resilience, and accomplishment through 15 sites. And together the sites tell a story about Black life in New London while tying into larger stories about enslavement, the Great Migration, and the struggle for civil rights. So please mark your calendar to join us next week as well. So with that, I can stop sharing my screen and let Kathy share her screen.
Okay. And can you see the full screen?
Yes, perfect.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Jane, and thank you, Stacy and Jane, for welcoming me to this wonderful series that you do. I'm just delighted. The Barnum is kind of an unusual story, not just for the historic relevance of Barnum and his legacy, but certainly for historic preservation and disaster recovery and reinvention with what we're doing today. So with that, in the hour time that we have, I tried to pack that all into this presentation. So it's going to be a roller coaster of images and stories. So buckle up, folks. And yes, Jane mentioned and thanks to those who sent questions in advance. I actually altered the presentation just a little bit to maybe answer some of those in advance. So thank you. And yes, please, if you have questions, put them in the chat and we can talk about it at the end of the presentation. So with that, let me just put this in context for you. So P.T. Barnum, today, people put P.T. Barnum squarely in the 20th century. He makes sense with the technology available, entertainments. When we look back, he doesn't make sense in his own time frame. He's born in 1810. Okay, so let's think about that. Napoleon is still alive. He's a current event. Okay, founding fathers are still alive. If you saw The Greatest Showman movie with Hugh Jackman, okay, great fun. When you see that opening scene and Barnum and his father go running in New York City to catch the train to Danbury, the train is not invented yet. Okay, so this is how early Barnum is in the context of time. So people also automatically go to The Greatest Show on Earth. Oh, he's the circus guy. Well, the fact is that Barnum was over 60 when he started The Greatest Show on Earth and the circus enterprise came to him. It was his retirement project. And we'll get into that a little bit, but that sort of sets the tone. So a little bit about Barnum. He is born in Connecticut. He is a Connecticut native. He's born in Bethel. Day after 4th of July. He's born on July 5th. And it was a rather modest family. They were not destitute by any stretch of the imagination. Actually, Barnum's mother's family had some wealth and owned a lot of the property in the downtown of Bethel. But Barnum, he wasn't a real big fan. And he writes about this in his autobiography. Well, we're not imagining this. We couldn't be any luckier because he writes such a thorough, comprehensive autobiography, starts it in 1855 and adds to it through the course of his life. It was organic. But Bethel was his family home and he loved it. But his energies were peculiar to an agrarian lifestyle. He saw the world as an opportunity. Now, with an emerging America, what is happening? We have a constitution that gives us unalienable rights. Okay, so he believed that he had a voice to add to society. And as a young man in his 20s, he started writing letters to the Danbury newspapers, just opinion pieces. They just didn't print them. And in his 20s, he said, fine, you're not going to print my opinions. I have a right to have a voice. I'm going to start my own newspaper. And he does. It's the Herald of Freedom. Produces it now in the 1830s, okay, in Bethel. It turns out to have a rather large circulation. He winds up being sued 3 times for libel. The last time the suit lands him in jail for 60 days, okay, people are outraged. The freedom of the press, we can command our own voice. If you don't like the opinion, okay, that's fine, but he winds up in jail. People of the community were outraged. They decorated his jail cell in Bethel. They had a parade. This is an illustration of the parade that they had for Barnum when he was freed from jail. And they also let him continue to produce the newspaper while he was in jail. So this is, democracy at its rawest, element, battling out the terms. I mean, we're still doing it today, right? But this is happening with Barnum in the 1830s. So he realizes he has an intellect and energies that were far beyond, his family home and the family farm. So with that, he does in Bethel. He starts to become a lottery agent. Lotteries were sanctioned by the church, state and church at the time. You know, it was a Calvinist belief that lotteries weren't acceptable for wholesome moral living. Basically, Connecticut overturned lottery legislation, and Barnum, although he believed in cheerful Christianity, he was a faithful person, he couldn't make enough money to support his family. And that's really when he decides to move his wife. His wife was pregnant at the time, but in 1834, they move into New York City. So think about New York City in the 1830s. You know, the Irish immigration is just about to, you know, surge into the Battery area. There are no bridges. New York is so far downtown. This is really like the World Trade Center section. It's that far down. So the harbor is thriving. The streets, you know, are active with people. The influx of immigration is happening at a rate that the infrastructure of New York then could barely handle. So it's a tough and gritty place. But Barnum saw it as an opportunity. You know, what could he actually do to, you know, imagine a New York City that would be fantastical? And let me, I'm sorry, I went too far, but he decides to open the American Museum in New York. And he really takes it from, let me see if I can go back. Here we go. So he actually purchases, using a section of land he had as a child in Connecticut called Ivy Island. He used that last bit of worthless land in Connecticut as collateral to purchase the American Museum. He reskins it. It was Scudder's Museum. It was a scientific, much like Peale's American Museum, it was really for the educated, it was for the wealthy, it was for scientific examination. It was not a public entertainment attraction. There was no such thing as that at that time. Family entertainment did not exist. You know, theater going actually was considered immoral for women and children. So there was no place for people to go who wanted to explore and be entertained. Theater going was predominantly male audiences. There was drinking, there was smoking, there was violence, there was prostitution. So none of that was going to exist in Barnum's establishment. So what he does is he transforms the ideals of entertainment and makes it, you know, available to family audiences, to women and children. But he understood that the idea of ingratiating this type of new entertainment would happen slowly, but not happen without incredible imagination and ingenuity and cleverness. People loved it, and they started flocking to the American Museum. It really does become a major cultural attraction, not just for New Yorkers, but people were starting to migrate into the city to exclusively go to Barnum's American Museum as a destination. Now, Barnum, again, he never abandoned his political beliefs, and he did believe that if you were born into a country that could command a public voice, it was really your obligation to, you know, be a part of the institution that is the Constitution and a growing America. But what was happening now was the ideas of slavery were starting to expand west. He was a Jackson Democrat until the eve of the Civil War, but he is put up as the candidate for the Democratic governor of Connecticut in 1852. He pulls the candidacy because he does not believe in the direction that the Democratic Party is going at the time. So it's extraordinary. People don't necessarily think of Barnum that way. And in so much as people think of Barnum in a very bombastic character, you know, not a lot of control, Barnum was one of the country's greatest temperance champions of the time. He, at that point, he had been to England, traveled around France, Germany, all over. He discovered wine, and he comes home to New York. His career is starting to take a path. He's not the Barnum brand yet, but ultimately what happens is he is at a trip upstate New York, and he sees business leaders, politicians, civic community representatives who are all drunk out of their deportment is not acceptable as far as Barnum is concerned. And he's really appalled. I cannot accomplish what I want to in my life if that's my behavior. He came home to Bridgeport and cut the heads off of all of his wine bottles, signs the Teetotalers Pledge. If you were at his American Museum in New York City, you wanted to drink or smoke, you had to leave and pay full price to get back in. He walked the walk. They had temperance plays at the museum. So he's really establishing a character that's so far from contemporary thinking that it's very surprising to people. Now, going through the 1840s, 1850s, heading into the 1860s, the American Museum is thriving. It has become an anchor, in society as a great attraction for people to go visit. At any given time, there were 500,000, I can't even, as a museum person, I can't even think of what curating 500,000 exhibitions would have been like in that museum. It is estimated that 38 million people actually visited Barnum's American Museum. Now, this is at a time where American population was only about 32 million people. So those numbers are great today, but staggering when you think of the time that it happened. This is actually a real photograph of the American Museum way down on Broad Street in Ann, about 1850s. So Barnum actually, with his American Museum, he is known today by the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions. This is a global entity, okay? IAPA, it's called. Everything from the V&A in London is part of IAPA to Disney World in Florida. If you're an attraction, you're part of this organization. In 2012, Barnum was inducted into the IAPA Hall of Fame by this global organization, not for the greatest show on earth, but because of his American Museum. He is really known as the founder of the attractions industry. And that's incredible. Connecticut owns that. So so we've got a heavy, legacy to live up to. Ultimately, what happens with the American Museum, because of Barnum's true political beliefs, he is the author of the amendment to the Connecticut Constitution to expand citizenship, stopping slavery where it is. He becomes one of the first Republicans with Horace Greeley and Abraham Lincoln. Because he is such a public figure, the American Museum is burnt down in 1865. It's reported by the New York Sun that it was the work of Southern sympathizers. So the American Museum was gone. The second museum burnt down a few years later. And it was at that point where his friend Horace Greeley said, take this as a sign, my friend, and go fishing. It's time to retire. Barnum tries. He just can't. He goes out west. This is the westward expansion. So he has the opportunity to see the domes of the Yosemite and everything. But during his travels, he meets Midwestern circus promoters, and they want Barnum's name because at that point, Barnum is an American brand, probably one of the most identifiable American brands. And he was like, okay, I can't rest, but I need to find action in this rest. He believes that going back home and opening the greatest show on earth, not in Manhattan, where he really did all of his productions, but in Brooklyn, because he leased his name to a museum proprietor in Manhattan, and there was a no compete clause, so he had to take the show to Brooklyn. So it actually opens 1871. So for the first time we see, Barnum's Magic City, the greatest show on earth. It was never really called a circus because there was so much, included. And you can see in this great tent, there's living curiosities, but there's a fine arts tent, it's a museum tent. He actually says it would revive my love of my museums. And that's how the greatest show on earth started. Now, he always liked to have a permanent structure because he would have his museums and his exhibitions. So he goes to Vanderbilt, we're a bit of an adversary, but he says, let me get the trolley barn at Madison and 26th Street. I'll reskin, the train lines. This will become the permanent structure, the Hippodrome. And that opens. Ultimately, Barnum's Roman Hippodrome gets renamed Madison Square Garden Barnum had an office at Madison Square Garden until he died. So there would be no garden if it wasn't for P.T. Barnum. A lot of people don't know that. The Greatest Show on Earth went through many iterations. I can barely keep up. Everybody thinks stick to one brand. Well, he didn't. He kind of went all over the board. And I love this one from 1887. P.T. Barnum's and Company's Greatest Show on Earth and Great London Circus combined, a traveling school of universal knowledge. Would not fit on my letterhead. But, and for those that don't know a little more context, in 1852, P.T. Barnum became one of the founders of Tufts University. I like to tell that to Connecticut people because there's usually jumbos in the room, but he is still listed on the board of directors, donated Barnum's Hall, which was the Science Museum. And unfortunately that burned in the 1970s. But Barnum donated Jumbo's hide, and that's how Tufts got their mascot, the Jumbos. So it's all about Barnum. It's not until late in life, Barnum actually does meet James Bailey. He found him to have steel of his own. And for the first time, it was only 3 years before Barnum died. In 1887 is the first time you see Barnum and Bailey, Greatest Show on Earth. And so you all know, Barnum dies in 1891. Bailey continues Barnum and Bailey, Greatest Show on Earth. The Ringlings are the competitors, and theirs was World's Greatest Show. When Bailey dies in 1907, the Ringlings purchased the Barnum and Bailey show. They traveled them separately for many years. And it's not until 1919, World War I, the economy and the Spanish flu forced them to combine the shows. So it's not until 1919 when they created the bubble that you actually see Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus. So Barnum's dead 28 years before that actually is part of American culture. If he was alive, he never would have taken second billing, never. So that gets us today. Before Barnum actually passed away, his true interest was to leave a legacy behind him. And certainly Bridgeport, his beloved Bridgeport, was part of that. He was donating money to the Bridgeport YMCA. They did not like his universal beliefs. He took his money and he said, I'll establish my last museum. And the Barnum Institute of Science and History was created, all in the newspapers. And then sadly, he died right after it was all established and promoted. So he never lives to see it, but they built it to spec. So this is who we sort of are today. That tree in the foreground is gone. When the tornado hit us, that thing kind of went right into the building. It didn't slam into it, but it hit the building with its upper limbs. We incorporated Barnum's mission statement, instructive entertainment. We decided to really today go back and really try to capture Barnum's spirit to create the future museum. Barnum did it so right. What would he do today is our question. So this is the museum, the way it looks. Just as a quick little aside, when People's United Bank, now M&T, came into town. Well, People's Bank has been here since the 1840s, but when the new corporate headquarters was being established, Richard Maher, the architect, wanted to raise the Barnum building. It was sort of in the way. Fortunately, Connecticut SHPO and the National Park Service has stepped in and said no. And then they said, well, we have to whitewash it. And they said no. But the building in the earlier photograph, this strip where the trees are, that used to be Gilbert Street. So the whole streetscape was reconfigured, and it puts the museum in kind of a challenging environmental ecosystem that has really presented challenges today. And the most severe being the EF1 tornado that struck the building in 2010. It was not pleasant, and it was extremely confusing. It was really one of the first tornadoes. It seems like Connecticut gets hit with a tornado every year or so these days. But in 2010, when this happened, nobody had any idea what the heck just happened in downtown Bridgeport. This is pretty much what we saw. This is just the block over from the museum. Trees were down everywhere. Glass windows were just blown out. You know, it's a historic downtown. So that window is about 9 feet tall. That's a lot of glass. And that was just one. The other window on the north face of the building also blew out. The curtains were, it was an alarming thing. And it wasn't until the next day had we any idea what happened. Now, as we're trying to process all of this, it was barely a year after that. So in 2011, Hurricane Irene came in. And then the year after that, it was Superstorm Sandy. So we were in constant phase of forensic evaluation. Our architects, our engineers, the collections people, it was just constantly. And for the insurance company, they're like, now you got that, well, the tornado didn't cause this, but it caused, you know, what's underneath, but now you have, it was just a nightmare to really assess this logically and methodically. So it would be a relevant document to submit. Honest to God, over 5 years of battling back and forth with insurance companies to figure all this out. The picture that you see is the Barnum statue. If anybody's ever been down at Seaside Park, it's the Olmsted area. That water that you're seeing, yeah, that's the road. Okay, so that was actually during Irene, not even Sandy. Sandy was worse. So to one of the questions, what we had to do, when the tornado hit, the HVAC system just sucked in. You see a tornado because it's garbage. So when the HVAC system sucked everything in, it just redeposited grit, grime, glass shards, particulates, chunks of the tree that fell, leaves, everything. It was truly a disaster and confusing to figure out. We had some 20,000, 25,000 artifacts in the historic building, ranging from documents to dishes to our 4,000-year-old mummy. It's like a hospital. Every patient has a different file and needs specific work, right? You can't move a patient without making a full assessment. So we had to really calculate what was going on. Nothing could get dealt with until insurance companies came in. And meanwhile, we were shoveling glass out of corridors because the windows just broke. It was one step at a time, right? Millions of little tiny issues and tactical, triage had to be done for every single artifact. And then let's not forget the human capital here. You have a staff that are just devastated, looking at you like deer in headlights. What's going to happen to me? This is my livelihood. So it's a million things that have to be navigated. Then the mold comes. So this is the undercarriage of our Tom Thumb, literally our Tom Thumb carriage. So because the HVAC is shot, there was no way to fire up the heat to extract the moisture to balance out the relative humidity. It's called hygroscopic shock. So just on one object, you can see over here, this is our object conservator dealing, because everything is hygroscopic at a different level. So all of the wood of the carriage just became saturated immediately. So the wood swelled. And then it contracts. And what happens is the paint doesn't follow the same hygroscopic levels that wood does. So all the paint started flaking off. The leather started curling and molding. The textiles, the wood, there's metal on it. Everything was reacting differently. And there was no way to stop that immediate disaster issue. This is one of the original chairs from Barnum's Iranistan mansion, his Bridgeport mansion, 1847, covered with just particulates and grime. So we needed conservators that were expert in their different type of mediums. So it was creating an army of skilled, talented people to deal with objects in their situation before we can take anything contaminated. Everything had to be cleaned because nothing could go into a new environment. Anyway, there are success stories. This is the restored carriage. It was probably the most damaged, but bravo to our conservator. But then, of course, you have to mitigate the damage. It's like lessons learned. Things are in harm's way. We were successful at getting a series of grants from the National Endowment, about $250,000 to digitize and do some repair on the artifacts. And now we are part of the Connecticut Digital Archive. So there are a couple of thousand objects that people could actually research now. And And then with COVID coming, it's become a tool to keep us very vibrant in a global community. So benefits. But then it was finally time. It took over a year to get the artifacts cleared out before we could get into the building. And this is really what we had to deal with. All of the 1980 Richard Maher period renovations in the building had to go. And we were faced with an extraordinary amount of debris, a lot of issues that were really concealed deficiencies that weren't done correctly at that time that you wouldn't otherwise know because there was modern drywall up. So this has been an ongoing research project, and we're very lucky. We've gotten wonderful support from Connecticut SHPO and the Connecticut Trust to bring in highly skilled historic preservation researchers, forensic analysis for historic preservation to do this the right way now. So as devastating as it looks, it's really become an opportunity. Now, another success story. We've completed the first and the second phase of this. If you can look straight to the back wall in this image, you can see those gray columns between the windows. That's, and I said this to the group that came last week, that's basically root canal. Inside those columns are steel strongbacks, like rebar, that have literally drilled down into the east wall of the building to keep that building from collapsing. And it's hard to believe the building didn't collapse. And that's always when I give a shout out to 19th century skill and engineering because it stood. But we've stabilized that. You can see in front of you is a series of columns. The two darker gray columns we installed about 2016 with a SHPO grant. There's a similar column structure in the attic level above this, and that's really stabilizing the east side of the building. In the foreground, the columns, those are temporary shoring to help stabilize the south rim of the massive timber dome because there was nothing supporting it. Just saying, it's good now. So one of the biggest damage. So on the other side of those windows that we just looked at, this is what the roof line looked like. The 1980 renovations put up a copper gutter to comply with SHPO regulations, but they used galvanized nails to do the tile replacement. And for 30 years, there were holes burning into the copper gutter. So moisture was coming in, which we did not know because there was a modern drywall covering it. So when the tornado came, it's negative pressure. It just sucks the building out. It just pushes everything out. So this wall went over 6 inches and the bricks were literally dangling. But again, good news. And thank you, Preservation Connecticut, formerly Connecticut Trust. We were able to repair, rebuild this wall. So this is where we are today. So it's strong. However, the next day, going around the building, it was like put a priority list of urgencies together. And the dome really was next in line. And you don't need an engineering degree to see that that does not work. So we, interestingly, did put a simulation, computer simulation together for an EF1 tornado on an 80 rib timber dome, what kind of undulation might occur, what would happen. And that is actually the computer simulation. And I'll be gosh darn, if you're driving southbound on I-95 through Bridgeport, just take a look at the dome and I'll be gosh darn if you don't see exactly that. So we're not pushing it back together again. We had to get rid of everything that the 1980 folks did. All of this mylar insulated insulation was just wrong. I mean, it created nothing more than a terrarium in the inside of the dome. I mean, look at this. This is something like Elon Musk would launch a missile out of. So it all had to go. So we could actually see what was going on. So it was all pulled out. And then working with GNCB engineers, the entire dome was re-engineered. So weight load distribution points are now safely, securely, in place. So the dome internally is stable. What's tricky is that you can't see this from outside. So people say, it looks fine. What's the problem? So we've been dealing with the internal stuff to get that stabilized. We're all ready to go the next phase and boom. Okay. So COVID is just thrown, and you all know, I don't have to tell you. So from cost escalations to supply chain delays to SHPO couldn't come out because the governor was like, nobody's going on site to do anything. It's just when we were getting ready to do the next phase. So it's just delayed things. But I thought this would be interesting. You know, people are asking, where is it all coming from? I mean, I literally, you know, we are the busiest closed museum on the planet. I've probably worked harder in these last 10 years than I ever imagined in my entire life, because you just can't stop. Every rock has got to get turned over. Where's funding for different types of things? So, and this is a little low. We've raised some more money since then, but about $12 million put just into the historic preservation of the landmark building, not including programs, general operating. You got COVID involved in all of that. So it's been constant vigilance towards, you know, the goal, getting the building fully restored and reactivated. And this is just, you know, people say, well, what have you been doing? Well, we've been doing a lot. Again, this is just, you know, to deal with the building. We've done multiple workshops, qualitative, quantitative studies, charrettes with the community to really says, what's the future of the museum going to be, as well as all the construction and work with the architects and engineers to do the designing and just fundraising. And I will point out that including me, there are 3 staff here and a fourth who's part-time, hardest working people in the industry. And this couldn't happen without that level of dedication and commitment. So bravo to the staff and team and the board of the museum for staying focused on this. A very happy thing, you know, in the fall, we did, because we knew we were going to be facing some issues with the budget. It's like, this is the time to go in for Save America's Treasures. It's been revived. The Barnum Museum is on the National Register of Historic Places as a nationally significant site. We got the national significance the month before the tornado hit us. Okay. So landmark designation was not even possible because of the condition of the building after that. But with all the work that we've done that you just saw, National Park says, bravo to you. Let's get you back on the National Historic Landmark list. Get that next round of reports going. So we were working on that as well. But because of that, we did apply for a Save America's Treasures grant. You have to be at least nationally significant, but they mostly fund already existing NHLs. And we got the $500,000 to do the windows. Couldn't even believe it. They called, Congressman Himes called my cell phone, and it was like, go us. So the Barnum Museum is actually used by the national parks as an example. Yes, you know, non-NHLs can get this funding if your appeal is strong enough. So insider information, if you're looking for an SAT, they love window repair. Little insider information. It's the most complicated part of any project. So I'm sharing that with you. I'm here to serve. So we already had the drawings. We are this far along. We were able to assess everything on the exterior with the team of historic preservation people we have. We worked constantly with SHPO to make sure it was exactly right and complied, just so you can get the scale. You know, there was a lot of inventory of everything from the brickwork to the terracotta friezes, the windows, and really getting the photographs to really demonstrate what we were looking at. The windows alone, there are 21 different types of windows in the building. Not including the stained glass, you know, that's beyond the 79, but we had to map it out and map out the condition of everything. You don't have to read all of this. This is just to show you exactly what we had to assess as far as an inventory of every single one of these windows. So it would be, well, not just to us, but it would certainly be clear to you know, the contractors who are going to be doing the restoration work. And you can see how it's mapped out, and you can really kind of get a close look at the level of damage of some of these things. I mean, honestly, it's like you could stick a pencil or a screwdriver right through some of the wood So how are we going to restore as much as we possibly can, and save, the original objects, the original frames, the original integrity of the building. So that's really been the charge. The stained glass, as just mentioned, are not part of the Save America's Treasures, but they are part of our overall bonding package. So it is more than, they're definitely going to have to take the windows out and send them to conservation laboratories to really do the assessments, because they just simply were not done in the 1980s. They put some kind of membrane on the exterior, which probably help them from being severely damaged during the tornado, but all of that has to get assessed. So we're always doing a GoFundMe. Sorry, Jane. But that's just a gorgeous picture of the way it looks. And just for context as well, the third floor of the building was the lecture hall, and Thomas Edison spoke here. The Wright brothers spoke here. Curators from the Peabody at Yale to the Museum of Natural History in New York spoke here. So it has historic relevance. Now, the good news, National Park said, bravo. Jenny Schofield over at SHPO office has been so dedicated to helping move this forward. In October of 2021, the advisory board of the National Parks read and unanimously voted to make the Barnum Museum a National Historic Landmark. And believe it or not, the Barnum Museum will be Bridgeport's first NHL. Everything's on the National Register, but Bridgeport actually does not have an NHL. So this is going to be an exciting day this summer. The final signatures should be coming. But somebody asked in the questions also, how am I doing for time? Okay. So with all of that work going on, we still couldn't lose sight of what are we going to do? We've got to activate a 21st century museum meeting the needs of contemporary audiences. This can't just be a simple, stick an object in a case with a lid over it, some label copy. People don't want that as much now. They want to engage. They want to feel emotionally connected to a visit that they have. So we did a lot of work assembling armies of people in the community and beyond to really start talking about this. So what we realized was we've got one of the world's greatest showmen, noticeable showmen, and we've got a lot of scholarship, and these two things have to meet and they have to blend. So that's an impressive charge. What we learned from all of the people and hundreds of people, workshops, focus groups, what we learned is that people want to be immersed. They want to feel transported from the moment they come in. It's like, how do I do it? And the question that kept coming up in all of these groups is, geez, what would Barnum do? What would Barnum do? That became the question that we had to answer. What would Barnum do? And that's what we're going to do. We brought to the table a design firm out of California called BRC Imagination Arts. They are responsible for the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum in Springfield. They are actually being considered for another very prominent American president's site as well. They should be finding that out very, very soon, and we wish them luck. But they understand iconic figures and how their moment in time needs to resonate with us today to make us understand certainly the time and culture from where they're from, but where are we going from here? And that's best really through immersive storytelling, master storytellers. So everybody comes to the table. For Charette, we had to pick a different voice. It wasn't just, it's not going to be the Kathy show. We had to, just straight in front, the woman Elizabeth, that is our historic preservation architect. Next to her with the beard is an attractions expert. We have an educator, an educator came, community representatives, people with different voices, different opinions, different needs out of a modern museum. Everybody got together to illuminate the stories that we're going to tell through Barnum's struggles and triumphs. So we're not telling the story, he's born in Bethel and he does this in New York City. We're telling it through themes. So the Barnum Museum is going to be told through illumination, through curiosity, rebounding from failure, risk-taking, all of these things that aren't just characteristic to Barnum's life and times, but we can find those moments in our own lives and relate on a human level. So that's the intention of the future Barnum Museum. So we got to transform downtown. We're very excited about M&T Bank coming in. They are demonstrating their true commitment to certainly to the Bridgeport community. And we're excited that we're going to be able to transform downtown to be something that's going to be appealing and engaging, not just for, well, certainly for our regional community, but for the thousands of people that are on I-95, you know, that are coming in, the international guests that are reaching out to us now. So there'll certainly be something for everybody, and it'll take you through those stories of learning and, like I said, illumination through those elements, and certainly the use of technology. You know, that's where we live in today. QR codes made a massive revival during COVID, right? How do we bring somebody into one story and then through their own device, give them an opportunity to take a deeper dive through a particular story? What is their path? So you come to the museum with 5 different people, you all can take a different, you know, take a different tour of these stories, then go back and together and talk about it, and then ultimately come back to the museum. So that's what our intention really is for the museum. You know, pick a technology device. You know, we got to tell the story of the circus. We're only about 30,000 square feet of space. We don't have trapeze capability, okay? So when you get to the greatest show on earth, well, that's what AI could be good for. So this is going to be the experience. There's nothing like this from New York to Boston. So as part of my my pitch that we're not just creating a museum, we are creating a vibrant, you know, urban attraction that is going to pull people off of I-95, off of the trains. You're not going to be able to use Connecticut as paths through anymore. You're going to get off. You're going to come to the Barnum Museum. We're going to get you to the Mystic Aquarium. We're going to get you to the Norwalk Aquarium, the zoo uptown. This is going to be a destination for people. So that is the plan. And to keep us alive, another one of the questions, what we realized during COVID is we really leaned into creating a YouTube channel, not just posting stuff, that we wanted our YouTube channel to be something enriching and deeply engaging for people. And it was actually David Fay from the Bushnell Theater who said long before COVID, Barnum needs a channel. So I always think of David, but now, and this is an old image, but starting from 0, the channel just topped 250,000 views. We've gotten closing in on 2,000 visitors. So please go to our YouTube channel. This program will be up on it so we can help support the, you know, Preservation Connecticut, and, you know, and like and follow and be engaged on this platform. So this is going to be our bloodline during the construction. We just had the walkthrough. So we are going to be under scaffolding coming this summer to restore the building as we move into the next stage, which is designing all of those concept art drawings. They need their calculus. That's going to become the next reality. So we are closing in on it. So Barnum, goodness gracious, he gave us these wonderful words. You know, whatever you do, do it with all your might, work at it day, you know, early, late, in season, out of season, leaving no stone unturned, deferring not a single hour, that which can be done just as well right now. That is my boss. That wrote that in 1878, and that's what I have to read every day to just keep me going. But on a nicer ending note, Barnum's final words right before he died, and I think these are wonderful words to live on. I believe in this world is in great measure what we choose to make it, and I therefore propose to point out, as so far as I can, the best methods that are best calculated to enable us to get on in it and obtain comparative happiness. And I wish you all those words. So with that, the show will go on, and thank you all so very much. And what's my timing? I think I'm maybe a couple of minutes over, Jane.
No, you're perfect. We have a good 10 minutes for discussion if people have questions. I think you epitomize Barnum's sentiments perfectly, Kathy. No one else would have persevered through all of those challenges and overturned every single stone like you have. It's really a remarkable story.
I know, and I always worried about the stone that I missed. So, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Stacy, you want to read any of that were on the Excel sheet so I don't, my cursor is acting funny.
Sorry, hold on one second. I'm just going between things here. So you talked a little bit about the development process in the event description. So I think that one's covered. In terms of artifacts, manuscripts, buildings, even information, how did you compensate for what has not survived? What has imagination, intuition, and guesswork played?
So as far as I'm assuming what has not survived from the disasters, I'm assuming that's how I'm interpreting that question.
I believe so.
Astonishingly, we only lost one artifact.
Wow.
Only one. And when I tell you, believe it or not, the most water, even with Irene and Superstorm Sandy, the most water poured into the building from the tornado. And water finds its way, right? So the basement level is where they had the offices. They will not be going back to the basement. And the water poured down on the rack that had all of the Barnum documents. Right. So the city is locked down. Mayor locks the city down. So there's nobody coming. Honestly, I wrote the Barnum Museum's emergency manual, the emergency guide. Big, everything's in there. And and it's kind of a joke. It's like biohazard waste, the hurricanes are in there. And I always joke, alien invasions, everything is in this. And tornado is in it. And the first word says, when you get the warning. There was no warning. It rendered that book completely useless. And I've actually spoken around the country and even to a museum in Germany on disaster readiness. And what you need to have are the names of the emergency people. You need the phone numbers. Who do you contact? Our insurance company, everybody's like, oh, make sure you have your insurance. Well, guess what? They were 2 blocks away in a tornado. They were not helping. You know what I mean? So you really need to think things through as far as what you can do internally after you make sure your people are safe. Because it's another thing. I was thirsty, and going to so many programs for disaster readiness. What do I not know? What do I not know? What I found out that everybody that teaches disaster readiness have never lived through a disaster. It's all textbook. Useless. And FEMA people don't like it when I say that. But I'm happy to continue to say that. So I've called, and most recently when there was that weird flood down this way, the Westport Playhouse, called them because they had a flood in the electrical basement. It's like, what do you need? Are you okay? What do you need? And sometimes just having that human voice. We were so ready that the Barnum Museum was actually on the American Institute of Conservators grid. So when we got hit with the tornado, they knew they had an overlay and they were trying to get a hold of me before I was even able to reboot my computer. So having that network is the most important thing. All the logistics usually are useless, because you're not allowed in the building. Nobody was allowed in the downtown for a couple of days. Anyway, but one of Barnum's autobiographies, well, everything got soaked, but we became a chain gang with the staff that was here, and we laid materials out and just started flipping things through the course of the day to let them air dry, because like I said, nobody's coming with a refrigerator to get these things out right away. One autobiography from 1872 was sort of tucked in a way, it just got missed and it just totally molded over. Now, fortunately for the collection, we have multiple 1870 autobiographies, but that's the only thing that we lost. There are still things in conservation labs. There were things that started showing their damage a year after. And our big gallery, for those of you who've been here, we have about a 5,000 square foot gallery, which really became the large object, visible storage, so to speak. When Sandy hit, that room had a puff back. Everything that was cleaned had to get cleaned all over again by the conservators. So it's just a matter of tracking all of this. One of the first responders to the Barnum Museum was the director of emergency management at Yale. And her advice was painstaking documentation. And like I said, I'm a giver. If anything ever like this happens, painstaking documentation, because the insurance companies dragged us through this for over 5 years. So that's another Zoom. But that's what we did. That was my full-time job practically, and my staff and the board for all of those years. So that was a testament to, you know, the power of patience and going Zen. So another question.
Well, I think you just answered Sarah's. Sarah's just popped up, but she asked how you would recommend other institutions prepare. And I think you just answered that, like documenting all of your collections.
There is, and I'll be very specific. There is, and I don't have it at my fingertips, the Council of Archivists have like a little pocket prep plan. It's this big. It's like the size of a credit card. Paper folds out, and what it literally is, it's loaded with information that you put as far as the contacts you need to know, and who has the authority, who does the checking. It also allows you to put little tiny pictures of your objects. So if you can't go in, you got to send the fireman in, you know, or the policeman in. They can grab something off the wall and get out. We have in our storage racks, everything's on wheels, everything's up. You know, so this way you can roll racks out instead of things, and they all have light reflectors. There's a little tiny card, like a light reflector. So if you have no light, you can see the reflection. So it's just little tiny things that you wouldn't necessarily think of. You know, what happened, we knew we needed a collections manager, and Adrienne St-Pierre, who was the curator at Fairfield, came because a tornado is so much, you know, more exciting, came, and Adrienne really totally managed the collections, damage mitigation, outload, while I was dealing with the engineers and the structural people and everything else. So it was really a team, and that's the power of it. You need the leaders, right? And you need the leaders that could really take their own piece and run with it. Then you get back together. I can't stress that enough. You need to have faith and empower people to do what they do well. And that has truly kept things moving forward.
So maybe a good way to wrap it up is just to quickly answer Dawn DeFeo's question is, what do you think his biggest contribution was to Connecticut? So
Barnum to Connecticut. So I think perhaps his greatest contribution to Connecticut was during his first term for Fairfield, not Bridgeport, in the Connecticut General Assembly, and pushing forward the amendment to the Constitution to expand citizenship and to vote to abolish slavery once and for all in this country. I think that really was his defining moment, which people don't necessarily know about Barnum. You know, and in doing that, he lost his business. He lost his American Museum. So there was a sacrifice for that. And he doesn't complain about it. He moves forward. You know, so it's that extraordinary ability to, you know, accept what happens to him and move forward. But another contribution might be the fact that Bridgeport was just kind of a small little hamlet. You know, it's sectioned off of Stratford, and Barnum saw it as the next greatest industrial hub out of New York City. And that's why it became his home. You know, the harbor was thriving, the trains, you know, become the New Haven, you know, New York train system is established. It's got the Huntington Turnpike, you know, a company is actually in place, you know, going towards the center of the state. So he really industrializes the city, but he also recognizes that communities need to be recognized for their own culture. So it's the point where Bridgeport is starting to diversify. So people need their churches and schools and the hospital and water, you know, and everybody is equal. And it was almost like a little utopia that he created, and he thrived for many, many years. He was the mayor for one term. They were 1-year terms back then, if you can imagine, you know, but his platform was really, you know, ensuring that it was a wholesome community. So crime was controlled, utilities were, you know, serving the entire population. There's a library, there's Seaside Park, you know, for everybody. So he does an awful lot on a global scale. It's no doubt his legacy still thrives with the greatest show on earth. And as of last week, it's back. So the Feld family could not let Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey go. So it's new. And I called it. If you go back and you watch any of the tons of interviews that I did back when they shut down in 2016, I said, they're going to revive. They're going to come back with a new model. And here we are. So.
Well, thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful.
Wonderful, wonderful. And like Kathy said, you can share this presentation. It's on their YouTube channel. It'll be on our YouTube channel as well. And if you want to follow up with us or Kathy with any additional questions or disaster training.
Absolutely. That is that's never thought that would be on my obituary, but here it is. So as much as I could pass forward, happy to do it.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Wonderful.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great holiday weekend coming up.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.